Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. When I stood up here in opening statements, I started by telling you that this case was really an easy case, not a complicated case, a very simple case. And as I stand up here before you now, I want to reiterate, this is not a difficult case. The question for you to answer in this case boils down to really just one question. There's only one important question in this case. One critical question that you have to answer. And that is, did Mr. Mayers, the man at the table, did he use a real gun or did he use a fake gun? Now, for those of you who have been jurors in the past, you know that as jurors, often when you sit in these cases, you have to answer a whole host of questions. You need to answer, was the defendant, was Mr. Mayers, was he even there that night? Was a gun, did he actually have a gun? Was the gun loaded? Did he actually fire the gun? You know, there could be a bunch of different questions that you have to answer. In this case, all those questions are agreed to. And it only comes down to that one question. Was it a real gun or was it a fake gun? Nothing else is in dispute. Now, I'm sure that Mr. Takapina, when he comes up here, he's going to stand up here, he's going to talk about Mr. Efron a lot. And he's going to talk to you about how did Mr. Efron earn his income, who's Mr. Efron's girlfriend, did Mr. Efron tell people he was a millionaire, or what kind of lifestyle did Mr. Efron lead people to believe he had on Instagram? None of that matters. None of that matters. None of that relates to the singular question that on November 6, 2021 in Hollywood, did the defendant have a real gun? Did he have a fake gun? Now, you're not going to hear me, and you haven't heard Mr. Lewin or I throughout this case tell you that after this crime happened, that Mr. Efron did not think to himself, I want to be compensated for what happened to me. And we are not going to tell you that Mr. Efron, after this crime, this horrible crime happened, that his primary motivation wasn't, man, I really need to go to the police and make sure that whoever did this was held accountable. That's not what Mr. Efron was thinking. Mr. Efron was absolutely focused on himself. We agree to that. We talked to you about that all the way back in jury selection. We told you at the time, Mr. Efron filed a lawsuit. Mr. Efron wants money because of what happened. Okay? That hasn't been hidden from you. We actually stood here and stipulated to that with the defense. That there was a lawsuit, what the causes of actions were. We agree to all that. None of that's in dispute. It's very important that you understand your role in this case, and specifically what your role in this case is not about. You are never going to be asked to decide how much money should Mr. Efron get for what happened to him that night. Does Mr. Mayers, does he owe Mr. Efron $1, no dollars, a gazillion dollars? You'll never be asked to answer that question. Your role is not to consider that. Not to consider that question. The only question that you are here to answer is, that night in Hollywood, did Mr. Mayers have a real gun or a fake gun? Was the gun that Mr. Mayers pulled out of his pants, pointed at Mr. Efron, a real gun or a fake gun? Was the gun that Mr. Mayers turned around and pointed at Mr. Efron and fired twice at that corner of Selma and Vista Del Mar, was it a real gun or a fake gun? I want to start out, too, with where I started in opening statements, with the video. My apologies, the audio here is not in this video. That's what we're talking about. That moment in time. When you see the gun on that video. The answer to that question that I've now posed to you several times is obvious. It's obvious. That man decided, for whatever reason, that he was going to settle his dispute with Mr. Efron that night with a gun. That he was going to do that in the middle of Hollywood. And that he was going to fire his gun not once, but twice. That man made the decision to reach out to Mr. Efron, to provoke this confrontation. He made the decision to bring two other people with him, Ills and Twelvvy. Mr. Efron's outnumbered 3-1. But still, he made the decision to bring a loaded, concealed gun with him to that confrontation. Those were his decisions. Those decisions had consequences, and you know the results of those decisions. And that is what we are asking you to hold him accountable for in this case. We know the consequences of his decisions really beyond a doubt. The video here is clear. The defense put up Twelvvy, Mr. Phillips, to narrate the video for you. And I guess the question you have to ask after listening to Twelvvy's is, are you going to listen to Twelvvy, the man who relies on the defendant for his livelihood, for his income, really for his entire career? Are you going to rely on him, or are you going to rely on your own lying eyes? Because what he described on the video did not happen. What did the video show? Well, it showed the defendant confronting Mr. Efron. It showed the defendant executing his plan to immediately get in Mr. Efron's face. Immediately engage in a physical confrontation. It shows Mr. Efron did not have a weapon. And honestly, it shows that Mr. Efron was really unprepared for what he was walking into. Mr. Efron went there to talk. He went there to argue. He went there that night to resolve his differences, not to engage in a physical fight. But he's immediately confronted with a physical confrontation. So how does he respond? Again, let's pause. Consider Mr. Phillips, 12. When he's asked simple questions, this is just a hypothetical, but if he's asked, what's the weather like that night? His answer is going to start out with something like, I couldn't tell. Mr. Efron is such a huge man. He's so muscular. When he approached me, he blotted out the sky. I couldn't tell you what it was because he's such a large individual. Okay? He repeatedly puts that fact in front of you. He wants you to focus on Mr. Efron's size, how big he is, how muscular he is. How honestly, it sounded like this was the first time that Twelvvy had seen Mr. Efron outside of the gym. He constantly repeated how much Mr. Efron was in the gym, how big he was. At that moment, when Mr. Efron is approaching the defendant, he doesn't know what's about to happen. We all know because we see it on the video. But at that moment, he did not know. He did not know the defendant had a gun. So Mr. Efron, this huge, hulking man, he's confronted outside the parking garage, and how does he respond? He responds by doing absolutely nothing. He's approached by the defendant, and what does he do? He reaches forward with his left hand. Now this man's coming right up in his face. He reaches out to maintain the distance. Twelvvy wants you to believe Mr. Efron's there to fight. He's there to start it. So when he reaches out with his left hand, what does that leave free? His right hand, his dominant hand. That muscular right hook. Does he throw a punch at the defendant? No. He honestly does nothing. He reaches out with his hand and the defendant immediately gets in his face. He's actually propelled backwards. Why doesn't he punch the defendant? Why doesn't he fight him? He's there to fight him, right? That's what Twelvvy wants you to believe. He's there to fight the defendant. Why doesn't he? Well, he told you. He knows. If I fight this man, it's all over. Not just his relationship with the defendant. He knows they're not going to recover from that. If I punch him in the face, we're done. Our friendship is over. But not just that. My livelihood, my life is over. He's thinking in that moment, we've had problems in the past, we've talked it out. We have problems now, we can talk it out. Okay? That's his mindset. He doesn't know the defendant's mindset, though. And he has no idea how bad it's gotten for the defendant. Because a relationship takes two people. And Mr. Efron, he can only give you his perspective. Apparently, though, it's gotten very bad for the defendant. Beyond repair. That is, Mr. Efron doesn't know that. He doesn't know how bad it's gotten until the next split second when that gun comes out. And you have to understand, in the instant that gun comes out, it has to be immediately clear to Mr. Efron, oh my God. It is so much worse than I thought it was. This man, my friend, a person I've known 15 years, is pulling a gun on me. This guy hates me. And this is not going to end well for me. It's all over. That's what he's confronted with in the split second that gun comes out and is pointed at him. My career's over, my livelihood, it's all done. Now, I'm going to go through multiple people's perspective. I am not going to hold back, okay? When I talk about the defense witnesses, I want to be very clear. What they got on the stand and told you were lies. They repeatedly lied when asked about a whole variety of topics we'll get into. But there was one thing that not even they could lie or deny. And that is, it had to have been obvious to you before you even walked into this court on this case. The defendant, and certainly his significant other, are powerful individuals within the entertainment industry. Even their own witnesses, even Twelvvy, even ASAP Lou had to acknowledge that too. And they certainly have enough power to cancel small players like Mr. Efron or Twelvvy or Lou if that's what they want to do. And that right there, in that millisecond the gun is pulled out, that's what Mr. Efron is faced with. So how does he respond to that? That's a lot to take in a very short amount of time. You cannot put yourself in his shoes and say, what would I do? You cannot possibly capture all the emotion, all the history, everything that's going on in his head. And he probably doesn't respond the way that you would. You probably would not walk after the person who just pulled a gun on you and unload on them verbally with your grievances. But he's angry. He's upset. He's confronted with his life changing, and he knows it's over. And even though the defendant pulled a gun on him, he's not really thinking about the gun. So he follows And he tells the defendant how he has failed the other members of their collective. And he uses ills and he uses Twelvvy as examples along the way. So we get to the next location, the parking lot. Vista Del Mar in Selma. And when we get to that corner, the defense, certainly Twelvvy, want you to believe that as they arrived there, Mr. Efron immediately started attacking ills. I'll go through the video. Honestly, we will slow it down and I'll show you where everyone is at that moment when the defendant turns around with the gun. But you know, you've watched the video. I honestly wondered to myself if I even had to address, was Mr. Efron attacking ills at that moment? There's daylight between them. Clear space. But this is where the defense is going to double down on the idea that you cannot believe what you see with your own eyes. Because when you watch the video, you can see space between ills. You can see space between Mr. Efron. Twelvvy could not acknowledge that on the stand. That's not why he was here. He was here to say that Mr. Efron was attacking ills. And I'm sure, as you listen to his testimony, when he first started testifying, you had to think, this sounds like something that's been practiced. This sounds like a man who's repeating pre-programmed answers to me. It came off very robotic. I don't have to tell you he was coached into certain answers, because you saw it for your own eyes in court. If you didn't see it, you heard it. When Twelvvy's asked a question, what is awe? That's kind of a mundane, really seemingly insignificant question. What does the defendant do? He screams out, don't answer that. Don't say. He's literally coaching him in court in front of him. And what's Twelvvy's response? My brother's company? Man, I don't know. I can't say. So do you expect him to come into court and tell you the truth about exactly what happened on that street corner? That video does not show Mr. Efron attacking ills. And that really is why when we get to the jury instructions, the instructions on defense of others are not going to apply in this case. Because what the video shows is that when they got to that street corner, the defendant thought, I've had enough. And he decided to pull his gun, and he decided to start firing at Mr. Efron. The video clearly shows, before Mr. Efron is anywhere near ills, the defendant is already pulling the gun out, turning around, putting his arm forward. When exactly in that sequence he fired, hard to say. The sound doesn't necessarily match up perfectly with the audio. These are from two different systems. The sound is farther away than the video, but they're close enough that you can tell that in those seconds, the defendant starts firing. How does Mr. Efron react? He reacts by grabbing ills and using him as a human shield. Would be a natural response when you're faced with someone firing a gun at you. How does the defense try to twist that, though, and reframe it? They try to tell you that's actually, Mr. Efron attacking ills. Because it's a tough case for them. Because it's all on video. You get to see it for yourself. This would have been a lot easier if there was no video and all they had to do was poke holes in Mr. Efron. But there's video. So they're trying to get you to believe that what you see on the video is not really what you see. Apparently, the defense also thinks that it's a problem that the defendant is actually firing shots at Mr. Efron. a problem for their defense of, apparent defense of skills, because they say actually what he was doing was firing warning shots. Warning shots. We thought it was a prop gun. There's no such thing as a warning shot from a prop gun.